Last month, a grandmother living in Pennsylvania received a $5,000 fine and faced the very real threat of incarceration. Her offense had nothing to do with narcotics or controlled substances. She was simply cultivating fruit in her own yard. At this very moment, scattered across the United States, there exist 15 varieties of fruit so potentially hazardous that government officials hold the legal authority to uproot your entire garden upon discovery. Some of these plants carry toxins potent enough to trigger violent seizures within just a few hours of exposure. Others are capable of igniting agricultural outbreaks that can wipe out entire farming operations overnight. And some appear so utterly unremarkable that one could be thriving just beyond your fence without anyone suspecting a thing. The real question worth asking yourself right now is whether any of these outlawed plants might already be taking root somewhere on your property. Before the complete list is revealed, make sure you hit that subscribe button on Primal Life. These are exactly the kinds of vital updates that could spare you thousands in legal fees and protect the garden you've spent years building. Over the next few minutes, you will learn which fruits are explicitly prohibited under federal law, which states actively pursue legal action against home gardeners, and the deeply surprising reasoning that sits behind every single one of these prohibitions. If you've ever planted a fruit tree and quietly wondered whether it might attract unwanted attention from the USDA or your state's agriculture department, that concern is entirely justified. Today, Primal Life is taking a deep dive into the fruits that federal and state governments actively discourage from growing on American soil. Several of these plants are responsible for medical emergencies that most hospital emergency rooms are simply not equipped to handle effectively. Others propagate plant-borne diseases so aggressively that they place entire industries at risk, threatening billions of dollars in agricultural revenue across every region of the country, from Florida's citrus groves all the way to California's vast farmlands. But before reaching that first forbidden entry, it's essential to understand exactly how a peaceful backyard garden in Pennsylvania evolved into a federal legal matter, and, more importantly, what you can do to ensure your own garden stays firmly on the right side of the law. The first forbidden fruit is Ackee. Picture a vivid red pod splitting open like a wide grin, exposing glossy black seeds nestled inside. At first glance, it seems beautiful, perhaps even inviting. But this fruit, Ackee, sits at the very top of this list for a compelling and sobering reason. It carries a complete prohibition across all 50 states, with particularly rigorous enforcement carried out at major ports of entry and customs checkpoints spanning the entire country. The reason the FDA invests so heavily in controlling this fruit comes down to timing. When fully ripe, Ackee offers a genuinely pleasant sweetness, but consuming it at the wrong stage is nothing short of a life-or-death gamble. Inside the fruit lives a compound called hypoglycin, a toxin capable of inducing what is medically known as Jamaican vomiting sickness. The experience begins with intense nausea appearing within hours of ingestion. From there, the situation escalates rapidly into convulsions, loss of consciousness, and without urgent emergency intervention, death itself. No household method exists to determine whether an Ackee fruit has reached a safe stage of ripeness. Not even experienced Caribbean farmers who have grown up handling this fruit can offer any firm guarantee. There is no reliable color indicator, no detectable scent, no outward warning of any kind. It operates as a silent poison concealed within packaging that nature designed to appear welcoming and harmless. Attempting to import fresh Ackee into the United States will result in immediate confiscation at customs, and fines typically begin at several $1,000s. Choosing to plant it in a residential garden constitutes a federal violation. After a troubling pattern of tragic outcomes reported throughout the Caribbean region, the FDA made a definitive judgment that no level of risk was acceptable. In America, that standard holds firm, and no conscientious gardener should test it. But Ackee is far from the only fruit that uses a disarming appearance to conceal its dangers. The next prohibited fruit on this list was once so widely embraced in home gardens that the federal government actively promoted and distributed it to American households by the millions, right up until the moment they discovered the catastrophic consequences of having done so. The second forbidden fruit is black currants. The earlier mention of government-promoted plants that later became banned finds its clearest illustration in the story of black currants. During the early decades of the 20th century, black currants were genuinely beloved across American households. They appeared in jams, jellies, homemade confections, and even elegant desserts served at formal gatherings. From Maine stretching across to Illinois, American gardens flourished with these deep purple berries, and families treasured them as a domestic staple. Then the federal government launched one of its earliest and most sweeping agricultural eradication efforts, and black currant was squarely in its crosshairs. The reason was not the berry itself, but what it enabled. Black currants serve as an intermediate host for white pine blister rust, a destructive fungal pathogen that came devastatingly close to collapsing the timber economy across New England and the Midwest. These regions depended heavily on their pine forests to supply raw material for home construction, furniture manufacturing, and a significant portion of broader economic activity. The threat extended far beyond any single state, placing entire industries in jeopardy. Cultivating black currants soon became a federal offense in several key states, including Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and portions of New York. Those prohibitions remain active in many of those areas today, with authorities retaining the legal right to destroy existing bushes and levy substantial fines against violators. There is a layer of irony worth noting. Certain states have gradually begun relaxing these restrictions, permitting some disease-resistant cultivars to return. But across much of the northeastern United States, this berry remains forbidden, and the overwhelming majority of home gardeners have absolutely no awareness of that fact. Yet the story takes another unexpected turn with the next entry, a fruit that remained perfectly legal for decades before being placed on the prohibited list almost overnight. The government had spent considerable resources encouraging its cultivation, and is now spending comparable resources trying to eliminate it entirely from the landscape. The third forbidden fruit is miracle fruit. This entry introduces a berry that seems almost lifted from the pages of science fiction. Miracle fruit is a tiny red berry that possesses the extraordinary ability to fundamentally alter how the human palate perceives flavor. Consuming just one berry and then tasting something sour, like a raw lemon, produces the overwhelming sensation of sweetness, as if drinking freshly made lemonade. No sweetener involved, no chemical additive, simply a natural protein known as miraculin that temporarily interferes with taste receptor function, causing anything sour to register as sweet for up to a full hour afterward. On the surface, this sounds entirely harmless, perhaps even delightful. The FDA, however, developed serious reservations. The concerns centered on the possibility that miracle fruit could mask the warning signals provided by taste when food has already spoiled, potentially leading someone to consume something genuinely unsafe without detecting the danger. Questions also arose about whether the berry could be used to alter the perceived flavor of medications or other substances, where accurate taste perception carries real consequences. While miracle fruit has not been universally prohibited, states operating under rigorous agricultural import frameworks, California being the most prominent example, have created regulatory environments where purchasing or planting the berry becomes practically impossible for most residents. In a world where taste functions as one of the body's primary early warning systems, miracle fruit introduces a layer of ambiguity that regulators find difficult to accept, particularly when children or elderly individuals who depend heavily on sensory cues are involved. Federal charges are not typically pursued, but local prohibitions and customs seizures remain common in California, Florida, and areas near international borders. It occupies a murky legal space that the majority of American gardeners would be wise to simply steer clear of entirely. The USDA once distributed calorie pear trees at no cost to American households and municipalities. Their white spring blossoms were stunning, their growth rate impressive, their resistance to disease and pests almost unmatched. They seemed to represent everything an ideal ornamental tree should be, and they were planted with enthusiasm along suburban streets and in residential yards from one coast to the other. Then the consequences arrived. Calorie pears escaped the boundaries of cultivated landscapes. Birds consumed the small fruits and deposited seeds across wide swaths of territory. Today, these trees have established themselves as dense, virtually impenetrable thickets armed with sharp thorns across the Midwest and throughout the South. They displace native forest growth in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina, manufacturing ecological voids where no other species can establish itself. Those thorns are not a minor nuisance. They routinely puncture tractor tires, inflict expensive damage on farm machinery, and render significant stretches of agricultural land completely inoperable. Farmers and landowners have expressed profound frustration, and understandably so. The same agricultural agencies that once handed these trees out freely are now directing millions of dollars toward their removal. Complete bans are now in effect across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. Nurseries cannot sell them, gardeners cannot plant them. If a calorie pear already exists on your property within a restricted state, authorities strongly recommend removal, and in certain cases, they will carry out that removal themselves and forward the invoice directly to you. Few policy reversals in the history of American agriculture have been quite this dramatic or this costly. But as striking as the calorie pear's thorns are, the next plant represents an entirely different order of ecological disruption. A fruit-bearing shrub generating 200,000 berries every single year and systematically rewriting the ecosystems it invades. Before continuing with the remaining entries, if you're finding genuine value in this information and want to protect your garden from unexpected legal exposure, subscribe to Primal Life and enable notifications. You will receive updates covering plants, crops, and gardening knowledge that consistently keeps you ahead of costly and avoidable mistakes. The sixth forbidden fruit is autumn olive. The berries produced by this plant are, by most accounts, surprisingly enjoyable, carrying flavor notes reminiscent of cranberries blended with pomegranate and offering a meaningful concentration of antioxidants and vitamins. So why has autumn olive been banned across Connecticut, Wisconsin, Virginia, and a growing number of additional states with each passing year? The answer lies in a single, staggering biological fact. A single autumn olive plant generates approximately 200,000 berries every year. Birds carry those seeds across miles in every direction, and within a few short years, entire hillsides become dominated by autumn olive thickets that suffocate native vegetation beneath them. But the plant's competitive advantage goes considerably further than sheer reproduction. Autumn olive manipulates the soil itself, fixing atmospheric nitrogen in ways that fundamentally alter soil chemistry. Native plant species that evolved across thousands of years within American forest ecosystems cannot adapt to those changed soil conditions and simply perish, leaving the landscape entirely surrendered to autumn olive. Originally brought over from Asia with the well-intentioned purposes of supporting wildlife habitat and managing erosion, the plant initially appeared to be a useful addition. What followed was an ecological catastrophe. States are now deploying every available tool in attempts to control it. Industrial herbicide applications, deliberately set controlled burns, and organized manual removal operations. But containing a plant capable of generating 200,000 seeds per individual specimen per season approaches the boundaries of what is realistically achievable. That figure has been independently verified by the USDA and confirmed by university agricultural extension programs operating throughout the Midwest. Once autumn olive achieves a foothold in a landscape, the financial commitment required into the fight back reaches into the millions. Connecticut and Wisconsin have elevated the offense of cultivating it to criminal status, with penalties that include mandatory removal carried out at the property owner's expense. Yet even with autumn olive spreading at the pace it does, the The following entry grows faster still, reaching heights of 20 feet within a single growing season and brandishing thorns capable of breaching steel. The seventh forbidden fruit is Himalayan blackberry. The earlier mention of thorns puncturing tractor tires finds its full expression here. Himalayan blackberries are the largest and most visually impressive blackberries most people will ever encounter, measuring roughly 3 times the size of varieties native to North America, and delivering a flavor that most who try them find genuinely exceptional. Their thickets climb to 15 feet in height, their canes grow as wide around as a human wrist, and their thorns are fully capable of puncturing not merely car tires, but the far more robust tires of agricultural tractors. Documented incidents across farms throughout the Pacific Northwest have confirmed this repeatedly. Abandoned properties across rural Oregon and Washington have been consumed entirely, with buildings, vehicles, fencing, and structural features disappearing under blackberry growth within the span of a decade. This is not rhetorical exaggeration. Entire former homesteads have been effectively erased. Their annual growth rate of 20 feet is possible because these plants reproduce through 2 simultaneous mechanisms: seed dispersal by wildlife and tip rooting, a process in which canes make contact with soil and generate entirely new plants from that point of contact. The berries are delicious, the white spring flowers are genuinely lovely, the ecological and agricultural consequences are devastating. Farmers cannot recover infested land without deploying expensive machinery and exposing workers to significant physical hazard. Livestock cannot graze anywhere in proximity to the canes. Property values decline measurably wherever Himalayan blackberry assumes control of a landscape. Oregon State University has placed the annual economic cost of managing this single invasive species in the millions of dollars, and the plant continues to reassert itself season after season. Residents of the Pacific Northwest who observe Himalayan blackberry establishing itself on their property are advised by agricultural authorities to pursue immediate professional removal before the spread becomes unmanageable. Those thorns create physical barriers that prevent access by both humans and animals. But the next entry on this list creates a different kind of barrier, one that threatens something far more fundamental to life across the American West: access to water. The 8th forbidden fruit is Russian olive. In the western regions of the United States, water is not merely valuable, it functions as the foundational currency upon which all life and commerce depend. Russian olive is systematically drawing down that supply. This tree produces small, silvery fruits that hold little appeal for human consumption, but birds find them irresistible. That preference is precisely the problem. As birds distribute seeds along waterways and stream corridors, Russian olive takes root and begins consuming water at a rate 3 times greater than the native vegetation it displaces. Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico have all enacted prohibitions against this tree because, in regions where drought is a permanent operational reality, this level of water consumption constitutes an emergency. Ranchers and farmers across the West watch with mounting alarm as water sources they have depended on for generations steadily disappear into expanding Russian olive thickets. Streams run dry, water tables retreat, irrigation infrastructure that entire farming operations depend upon begins to fail. In a landscape where every single gallon is accounted for and fought over, Russian olive occupies the position of the most immediate and costly threat. But its damage does not stop at water consumption. Russian olive produces biochemical compounds that suppress the growth of competing vegetation through a process known as allelopathy. The tree essentially poisons the ground surrounding it, creating sterile zones where native willows, cottonwood trees, and native grasses previously thrived for centuries. Enforcement is consistent and consequential. Property owners in Colorado or Wyoming who are found to have Russian olive growing on their land can expect authorities to remove it and to receive a bill for that removal, potentially reaching several $1,000s depending on the extent of the infestation. The message from Western state governments is unmistakable. They cannot afford to surrender their water resources to invasive trees. Russian olive steals water. The next entry steals something more insidious still, chemically poisoning the soil it occupies and erasing the ecosystems that once existed there. Before continuing forward, if this information is providing genuine value and you want to stay ahead of legal complications in your garden, subscribe to Primal Life and activate notifications. These are the kinds of updates that protect both your property and your wallet. The ninth forbidden fruit is buckthorn. Small, dark berries persisting through the winter months. On first impression, nothing threatening, but that impression could not be more misleading. Buckthorn functions as a form of chemical warfare directed at American forest ecosystems, and it has been prohibited across Minnesota, Illinois, Massachusetts, and a broad band of northern states. The mechanics of its strategy are almost unsettlingly sophisticated. Buckthorn berries contain potent natural compounds with strong laxative properties. Birds that consume them process and excrete the seeds with unusual speed, depositing them across expansive forest territories before traveling far from the source. But seed dispersal is merely the opening stage of buckthorn's ecological offensive. This invasive shrub leafs out weeks earlier in spring than the native plants around it, and retains its foliage well into the autumn, outcompeting native species before they have even completed their winter dormancy. Most troubling is the biochemical dimension. Buckthorn releases inhibitory compounds into surrounding soil that actively suppress the germination and growth of other plant species. This allelopathic mechanism functions as nature's own chemical warfare, and the consequences are total. Most troubling is the biochemical dimension. Buckthorn releases inhibitory compounds into surrounding soil that actively suppress the germination and growth of other plant species. This allelopathic mechanism functions as nature's own chemical warfare, and the consequences are total. Entire forest understories are converted into monocultures of buckthorn. No other species survives. Biodiversity collapses entirely. Anyone who has walked through a Midwestern forest, particularly in Wisconsin or Minnesota in recent years, has almost certainly encountered the aftermath without recognizing it for what it is. Dark, dense green thickets, occupying spaces where songbirds nested and wildflowers bloomed in abundance a generation ago. Annual removal expenditures reach into the millions. Property owners in states where buckthorn is prohibited face mandatory removal orders and significant fines upon discovery. Buckthorn manufactures ecological dead zones in forests. The next entry manufactures something else entirely: actual building evacuations. The 10th forbidden fruit is durian, widely recognized as the most polarizing fruit on the planet. It has been excluded from hotels, airports, transit systems, and even select residential buildings and apartment complexes across certain American cities. In Southeast Asia, durian inspires genuine reverence among its devotees. Its custard-like interior is described as profoundly complex, rich with layered flavors found nowhere else in the natural world. The problem that no one adequately prepares newcomers for is the odor. Imagine the combined sensory assault of decomposing onions, raw sewage, and industrial gas fumes, concentrated and intensified to a degree that penetrates poured concrete and forces its way through ventilation systems. Durian's smell has, on multiple documented occasions, triggered full building evacuations because building occupants genuinely believed they were detecting a dangerous gas leak. Hazmat response teams have been dispatched. These are not exaggerated accounts. They are precisely the kind of incidents that occur when someone brings this fruit home and assumes no one will notice. Setting aside the humor that might seem inherent in such situations, the practical consequences, landlord fines, neighbor disputes, emergency response involvement, are anything but amusing when you are the one at the center of them. While federal law does not prohibit durian outright, local municipal codes in sections of New York City, Texas, and Nevada Restrict its possession or transport within specific buildings and public areas. In Hawaii and parts of southern Florida, certain durian cultivars also carry agricultural restrictions due to their capacity to harbor citrus greening disease, a pathogen that threatens the multi-billion-dollar commercial citrus sector. The prospect of a neighbor sincerely contacting emergency services because they believe your backyard tree is producing a toxic gas leak is not hypothetical. It is the lived reality of durian ownership in America. The majority of gardeners in subtropical zones like South Florida choose to avoid the fruit entirely, for reasons both legal and deeply social. Durian assaults the senses. The prospect of a neighbor sincerely contacting emergency services because they believe your backyard tree is producing a toxic gas leak is not hypothetical. It is the lived reality of durian ownership in America. The majority of gardeners in subtropical zones like South Florida choose to avoid the fruit entirely, for reasons both legal and deeply social. Durian assaults the senses. The next fruit went after something more economically consequential: America's wheat supply, provoking a government response so intensive it resembled a military campaign and stretched across multiple decades. The 11th forbidden fruit is common barberry. The earlier reference to aggressive government eradication programs finds its most dramatic historical example in the campaign waged against common barberry. These small, bright red berries hanging from ornamental garden shrubs were once genuinely prized across households in the Northeast and Midwest, valued for their elevated vitamin C content and their utility in jams and preserved foods. But common barberry was identified as an alternate host organism for wheat stem rust, a fungal disease with the capacity to reduce wheat yields by 70% or more during a single growing season. In an era when American wheat production was feeding the domestic population and supplying export markets abroad, this was not merely an agricultural inconvenience. It rose to the level of a national security concern and an existential economic threat. The federal government's response was proportionally severe. Formal nationwide eradication programs, criminal penalties attached to possession, and government inspectors conducting systematic door-to-door surveys across farming communities in Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, and the Dakotas. Tens of millions of common barberry plants were destroyed in the process. Today, those prohibitions remain fully active in the states that produce the largest wheat harvests. A complicating factor persists. Japanese barberry, a separate but visually similar species, continues to appear in commercial garden centers, and homeowners regularly confuse the two. But common barberry, with its distinctly tart red fruit, remains categorically illegal in the key agricultural zones, and authorities continue to prosecute violations in defense of the wheat industry. One elderly resident of Montana received a $1,500 fine after government inspectors located common barberry on her property that she had inherited from her mother's garden and cared for entirely unknowing that it was prohibited. Unfamiliarity with the law offered her no legal protection whatsoever. Common barberry threatened wheat. The next entry threatens the entire citrus industry, an economic sector worth billions across Florida, California, Texas, and Arizona. The 12th forbidden fruit is trifoliate orange. These are small, fuzzy fruits bearing a surface resemblance to miniature oranges. They are extremely acidic and have essentially no culinary value. So what motivates the USDA to maintain a ban on them across the entire southern United States? The answer is that trifoliate orange functions as a reservoir for citrus canker and other devastating citrus pathogens that threaten commercial groves across the region. What makes this plant particularly alarming to agricultural officials is its ability to harbor and transmit disease while showing absolutely no external indication of infection. The trifoliate orange itself resists these pathogens with unusual effectiveness, displaying no visible symptoms of distress. Meanwhile, it silently distributes deadly disease agents to vulnerable commercial citrus populations across Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas. The citrus industry constitutes a multi-billion-dollar economic pillar, Florida alone supplies approximately 70% of the orange juice consumed by American households. A single outbreak linked to backyard trifoliate orange plantings could devastate entire regional economies, eliminating thousands of jobs and collapsing the financial infrastructure that multiple states have built around citrus production. An additional physical hazard compounds the threat. These trees carry 3-inch spines, not ordinary thorns, but genuine, hardened spines capable of puncturing tractor tires and rendering infested agricultural land practically unworkable. Wildlife distributes the abundant seeds contained in each fruit, and within a relatively brief period, affected land can become entirely unusable for farming purposes. Anyone in citrus-growing territory who encounters what appears to be a small, vigorous wild orange tree is strongly urged to contact their county agricultural extension office immediately and to leave the plant completely undisturbed, allowing trained officials to implement their established safe removal protocols to prevent inadvertent disease spread. Those 3-inch spines are formidable enough in physical terms, but the next fruit deploys a chemical defense system so lethal that Spanish explorers gave it a name that translates with complete literal accuracy to the little apple of death. The Spanish conquistadors who first encountered it named it Manzanilla de la Muerte, the little apple of death. That designation was not rhetorical flourish. They had arrived at it through painful and sometimes fatal first-hand experience. Manchineel produces small green fruits that bear a meaningful visual resemblance to crab apples or unripe green apples. Their aroma is pleasant. Their appearance suggests harmlessness. Manchineel produces small green fruits that bear a meaningful visual resemblance to crab apples or unripe green apples. Their aroma is pleasant. Their appearance suggests harmlessness. But a single bite initiates an immediate cascade of severe throat swelling, agonizing pain radiating through the body, internal hemorrhaging, and potentially fatal organ failure developing over the hours that follow. This is not mild toxicity. Manchineel contains some of the most concentrated and destructive plant-derived compounds identified by contemporary science. The danger extends well beyond ingestion. Simply standing beneath a manchineel tree during rainfall produces severe blistering across exposed skin as toxins are carried downward from the leaves. Direct contact with the bark can inflict chemical burns. Burning the wood releases a toxic smoke capable of causing temporary or permanent vision loss. Manchineel is completely prohibited in Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands, where it occurs naturally along coastal environments. Authorities identify individual trees with red paint markings and post warning signs in both English and Spanish. Tourism agencies issue explicit advisories instructing visitors never to touch the trees, never to take shelter beneath their canopy, and never to handle the fruit under any circumstances. Consider the experience of biting something that resembles an ordinary apple. Within minutes, your throat begins to constrict, breathing becomes labored, swallowing becomes impossible. Medical professionals treating such cases have virtually no active intervention available to them. The approach is entirely symptomatic management combined with the hope of survival. No antidote exists. There is no rapid treatment protocol, only the management of suffering and the outcome that follows. Visitors to tropical U.S. territories or southern Florida's coastal areas should maintain consistent awareness. Manchineel persists in isolated locations, and every single year, tourists end up requiring hospitalization because that awareness was absent when it mattered most. Manchineel destroys with raw chemical violence. Tourism agencies issue explicit advisories instructing visitors never to touch the trees, never to take shelter beneath their canopy, and never to handle the fruit under any circumstances. Consider the experience of biting something that resembles an ordinary apple. Within minutes, your throat begins to constrict, breathing becomes labored, swallowing becomes impossible. Medical professionals treating such cases have virtually no active intervention available to them. The approach is entirely symptomatic management combined with the hope of survival. No antidote exists. There is no rapid treatment protocol, only the management of suffering and the outcome that follows. Visitors to tropical U.S. territories or southern Florida's coastal areas should maintain consistent awareness. Manchineel persists in isolated locations, and every single year, tourists end up requiring hospitalization because that awareness was absent when it mattered most. Manchineel destroys with raw chemical violence. The next entry destroys differently, eliminating 80% of native bird populations within the ecosystems it colonizes. The 14th forbidden fruit is privet. For a significant portion of the 20th century, privet hedges represented a particular vision of American suburban refinement. Neatly maintained rows lining driveways and property boundaries from Connecticut southward to Georgia. Fragrant clusters of white blossoms arriving each spring, small dark berries that appeared completely inoffensive. Homeowners embraced them across generations as the definitive landscape hedge. Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina have now banned them in their entirety. What transformed a beloved garden staple into a prohibited species? The berries that appeared so harmless became vectors of ecological destruction. More than 1 million acres of southern forest land are now under invasion by privet. Birds distribute the seeds into roadsides, public parks, natural forest reserves, and abandoned properties with indiscriminate efficiency. Once privet establishes dominance in an area, plant diversity collapses by 90%. Native wildflowers, understory shrubs, and juvenile trees are simply incapable of competing. The harm does not end with plant life. Forests taken over by privet support 80% fewer native bird species than ecologically healthy forests. Native insects cannot sustain themselves on non-native privet foliage. Without the insect populations that birds depend upon for food, entire ecological networks unravel. For anyone over the age of 40, privet hedges are a defining memory, present at schools, religious institutions, and neighborhood boundaries throughout childhood. Today, the same plant that officials once endorsed as the ideal landscaping solution is being targeted by eradication efforts, costing southern states tens of millions of dollars every year, while property values continue declining in areas where it is spread beyond control. Yet the final entry on this list carries perhaps the most unsettling distinction of all. It contains a neurotoxin engineered by nature with such biological specificity that it poses lethal danger only to individuals carrying one particular medical condition. If you have that condition and consume this fruit without knowing it, the consequences can be fatal. The 15th and final forbidden fruit is carambola, more commonly known as star fruit. Its cross-section forms a perfect star shape. Its flavor balances sweetness against tartness in a way that feels genuinely tropical. Its deep, golden coloring makes it a visually appealing addition to salads and fresh beverages. So where does the danger lie? Specific varieties of starfruit contain a neurotoxic compound called caramboxin that is effectively harmless to individuals with healthy kidney function, but can be lethal for anyone whose kidneys are operating at reduced capacity. Here's what makes this particularly alarming. The human body, in good health, processes and clears caramboxin without difficulty or consequence. But for anyone living with compromised kidney function, including individuals in the early stages of kidney disease who have not yet received any diagnosis and may have no symptoms at all, caramboxin accumulates in the bloodstream and begins attacking the nervous system directly. The initial symptom often seems utterly benign: persistent hiccups that simply will not resolve. What follows is a rapid progression through confusion, deteriorating muscle function, seizures, and in cases of significant toxin accumulation, death. The number of people living with early-stage kidney disease who have no awareness of their condition is substantial. They carry no diagnosis, experience no obvious symptoms, and have no reason to believe that eating a piece of fruit could place them in mortal danger. right up until it does. The number of people living with early-stage kidney disease who have no awareness of their condition is substantial. They carry no diagnosis, experience no obvious symptoms, and have no reason to believe that eating a piece of fruit could place them in mortal danger right up until it does. Texas and Arizona have enacted restrictions on particular high-toxin star fruit varieties for two reasons operating simultaneously. The first is direct medical protection for vulnerable populations. The second is agricultural defense, as star fruit can serve as a carrier of citrus greening disease, threatening commercial orange and grapefruit industries worth hundreds of millions of dollars across the southwestern United States. One fruit, two entirely separate categories of threat: medical peril for people who may not even know they are at risk, and economic catastrophe for citrus farmers managing operations that employ thousands of workers. From Ackee's fatal toxin capable of inducing seizures and coma to starfruit's narrowly targeted neurotoxin that stalks kidney patients in silence, these 15 prohibited fruits deliver a consistent and sobering message. Responsible gardening requires knowing not only what grows well in your soil, but what is legal to grow, what is safe to grow, and what your choices mean for the health of your neighbors, the integrity of your regional agricultural economy, and the ecological vitality of your surrounding environment. Some of these prohibitions exist to protect individual human lives from direct poisoning, as illustrated by Manchineel's devastating chemical burns and Ackee's lethal hypoglycin. Others exist to defend multi-billion-dollar agricultural sectors, encompassing wheat, citrus, lumber, and related industries, from pathogens and pests that have historically demonstrated the capacity to erase entire regional economies, from Florida to California, from Texas to Maine. And still others protect native ecosystems from invasive biological forces that methodically dismantle biodiversity and convert living forests into ecological wastelands. Have you ever come across any of these forbidden fruits growing wild somewhere in your state? Have you watched government eradication teams at work removing invasive species from land near your home? Leave your state in the comments section of Primal Life and share what you have personally witnessed. Every comment gets read, and the regional variation in enforcement across this country is genuinely fascinating. If you want to explore which vegetables and herbs face comparable restrictions, or discover which controversial plants are actually perfectly legal despite their dangerous reputations, subscribe to Primal Life and turn on notifications. If you want to explore which vegetables and herbs face comparable restrictions, or discover which controversial plants are actually perfectly legal despite their dangerous reputations, subscribe to Primal Life and turn on notifications. And remember that grandmother from Pennsylvania who received a $5,000 fine. Her only offense was growing miracle fruit while remaining unaware of her state's agricultural import regulations. Knowledge is the most effective protection available to any gardener. Garden with intelligence. Garden within the law. Stay informed. See you in the next one. And remember that grandmother from Pennsylvania who received a $5,000 fine? Her only offense was growing miracle fruit while remaining unaware of her state's agricultural import regulations. Knowledge is the most effective protection available to any gardener. Garden with intelligence. Garden within the law. Stay informed. See you in the next one.